Well, hello everybody. I'm out here with the goats today. Let's see if we can see it. Oh yeah. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about some of the things in the field of psychology that most people never think of. And some of the things that people don't really understand when it comes to life in general and how to interact with liars. And there's no better way to put it than that. So I studied psychology for 6 years at some pretty well-known colleges. Radford University was where I got my master's degree. I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia's College at Wise, and both of which were in psychology. And I can tell you that there's some issues in our field, and the issues are mostly you've got a bunch of grifters, is what I will call them. Grifters, con artists, political activists, things that have no business, people that have no business in the field studying a scientific topic whatsoever. These people have no business in there, and yet they're pontificating what they believe to be fact without first testing that theory truthfully. And we've gotten to the point to where we have a peer review process in place in the field. And so in any scientific field, when you talk about the peer review process, you talk about getting published in a journal, your research being looked over by your peers. And so when it's looked over by your peers, theoretically, what that'll do is that will weed out bad research. Well, in psychology, there are so many peers now that are political activists, among other things, that peer review research and that peer review process really doesn't mean much. And that is when you have a turning point of people no longer, quote unquote, trusting the science. And so psychology was always on a rocky ground to begin with anyway, because it was a social science, right? It wasn't a hard science where you could say, okay, I do this, then this happens, right? In psychology, a lot of the things the processes that go on are in your mind. And so that's a lot harder to show evidence of. Now you see the behaviors, but you don't see the processes behind the behaviors, the motives, one might say. And somebody's is prone to lie about their motives. But anyway, so back to this process, right? So when I did my 6 years of formal education post high school, and got a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree, I found out first in my bachelor's degree that yes, psychology could be a science that shows solid evidence. And I was compelled by that. And so I had some older professors. Back then they were in their 70s. They're still around today, as far as I know. And they were good teachers. And they taught the scientific process as it is. And they told you how it really worked, which is you did research and then you run all these different data analysis, these analytics on these different parts of your research. So essentially when you collect data, you collect a whole bunch more data than you need. You find out which one has a significant correlation there, and then you publish whichever one has that significant correlation. And the remainder of that, what you do is you simply do the research after you collect that data. So you collect the data thinking one thing. If it doesn't pan out, you redo all of your back research to support what you've written. So when you do that, you're looking at really fraud in the scientific method. It's fraudulent thinking. But you know, for the sake of argument, you can do that because there was a publish or perish phenomenon going on in the scientific community, and there still is. So if you're an instructor at a university, most of the time they expect research from you, published research, and you can't get it published unless you find significant results. Well, if you don't find significant results, you can't publish. Therefore, the entire time you spent researching has been wasted, and that could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 years, whatever. Okay? And so, in essence, what you find is you find people who make up things, what they thought they were going to say. We've taken that to a whole new level now. We've taken it to political activism. Well, now, if we find data that looks kind of like it may correlate with something political, some hot button issue that we agree with, or that it disproves something we disagree with, we publish that. But there's no real proof. So we'll use data that should be, and I can talk about the different levels of data, but essentially we use data that should be in a chi-square in a ANOVA, for example. So we'll use ordinal level data where you really need ratio level data, okay? And so that data level really matters when you're picking out which test you can use and say, hey, there's a difference there, or there's not a correlation, there is a correlation, and then establishing that causation, which is a time order relationship. Well, you take that as a whole, and you see that we're running a lot of things that should be run on chi-square are being run as ANOVAs. And so the data that we're getting, we're not analyzing it properly. We're publishing that, and that's allowed to be published, okay? And then we're drawing scientific conclusions based on that. So let me give you an example. So I heard the statistic today that 50% of women are sexually abused in some form or fashion. 50%. And I asked the question, well, is it the same person sexually abusing multiple people, generally speaking, or is it multiple people sexually abusing multiple other people? And so the question wasn't answered, and the statistics were pretty much made up in my mind. Now, they may have had a study that showed that, but that study may have been from just a certain demographic, or it may have been from a really small sample, or it could have been from anything, but the person who was telling me that statistic didn't go into detail. So I used to work for the prison system in Virginia, and I'll tell you that the prison system in Virginia had what they called evidence-based practices with regards to some of their programming. Well, I was a counselor trying to do that programming for those inmates, and when I went through the training to train the trainer, I was supposed to be the program administrator, and they were trying to train me on doing it. I asked the question, well, what evidence are you referring to that suggests that this is the right way to do this? And I would ask that just about every time. And every time I got the same answer. Well, we'll send you that data and link and stuff, and guess what? Never got it. And all they required was if you'd have a bachelor's degree at the time. Now they require no degree in anything. So they don't even require you to know how to think in order for you to be a counselor in a prison system. And they're calling their programs evidence-based rehabilitation. Okay, so how can you rehab someone on a psychological level if you have no psychological training? If you're a high school graduate, I don't mean to insult you or anything like that, but if you're a high school graduate and you're claiming that you're administering evidence-based practices to an inmate and you've not been given that evidence to examine it, and you don't even know to ask the question, you shouldn't be training those inmates. You could be doing more damage than good. You are not qualified because you don't even know how to think in the scientific form if you're not asking that question. Or if, at least in your mind, it doesn't cross your mind, well, what evidence are we talking about here? because there are studies that contradict each other all day long. So which evidence is it? Right? Which study are we talking about that says that this treatment that we have works? Are there studies to the contrary? What were the research methods used? Okay, what were the research methods used in collecting said evidence? Okay, so my teaching at the local community college here is to educate students in not just psychology, but in how to think. So how to think is more important than what to think. So a lot of the new psychologists that I've met that are my age and younger, a lot of them just regurgitate this data and they don't even know how to think because they've never been taught. Well, thank goodness I was taught by 70-year-old men and women when I was in college, because they actually taught me how to think before they then tried to teach the facts. And so now I'm trying to teach students how to think, and they don't even like to engage a lot of times in an argument about things like abortion. Well, you can have an opinion on abortion, but you have to be able to think. You have to be able to look at that from a scientific perspective, look at what's happening, use the data that we do know as scientist practitioners, which is the developmental models usually, at what point a heart rate begins or heartbeat begins, at what point do fingers and toes develop, at what point does the quote-unquote zygote fetus begin to kick. So that's what we're talking about here, right? So you need to be able to take that data, use it to form your argument. Well, when I hear a lot of people saying that they don't want to argue these things, is they say, well, I don't want to offend anyone. And they won't say it just like that. They'll say, well, I'm a man, or I'm a boy, so I don't have an opinion on what a girl does with her body. Well, there could be a boy child in that woman's body. Okay? Just because you're not a certain sex doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. The same thing as with, so you can't say, well, that's a men's issue. I'm a woman, I shouldn't have an opinion. I've never heard that been said. That doesn't get said. So why is it only said on the abortion or on women's issues? Why can men not have an opinion? Well, men can have an opinion if they're informed. A lot of women are not informed, just like a lot of men are not informed. So what do we do to have this information, right? Well, that's the problem we're running into. And so we're using these political activist groups as citations now in our research that I've seen. We're using information from people who have a political agenda. And that is the problem with the quote-unquote science and why it isn't trusted. So as soon as you figure out, and it took me a long time to do that, when I got my master's degree, I thought, well, listen, I'm an expert in this field. Little did I know, I was more of an expert on how to think than I was of the field of psychology. Now I know how to think, and I know how to think for myself, and that, my friends, is what most people fear with regard to truly educated people. A true mark of an education is being able to think for oneself, being able to see an argument, agree or disagree, it doesn't matter, see where that argument might have some holes in it, explore those holes, see if those make the data that is collected by that research unstable or stable. And it's really quite simple. It's using really the Socratic method and proper thought. How do you just common sense your way through it? Don't just believe everything said. And you should believe probably nothing until it's proven. And that's the true scientific method, whenever you start doing that. But anyway, my point in saying all this was just to say this. A lot of scientists and researchers and so forth are not honest. A lot of people are not honest in their motivations. They're just trying to get their agenda pushed through. And what you'll find is they're not as smart as they say they are. And most of them are not that intelligent, really. And they go through that long of school, and they think that because they've gone through that long of school that they are so intelligent, but that's not necessarily the case. Just because someone's a doctor in something doesn't mean that they know everything, or it doesn't even mean that they really know the topic that they're purporting that they do know with their degree. So my takeaway is this. I do a lot of farming. I do a lot of things here around the house, and I grow animals, plants. I know about the world around me, and I have a broad-based knowledge in a lot of things other than psychology, building, animal husbandry, lots of things. And I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learned more through those mistakes than I did in the 6 years of college. But what I can tell you is that you need to look at everything with skepticism. Just because your college professor tells you doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Just because the president of the company thinks it's right doesn't necessarily mean it's right, or even close to right. So your job as a person is to discern what is right and what is not to yourself. And so what you'll find is that these animals will die if I don't feed them. Okay? And it's wintertime, they don't have hay. There's not grass growing up yet. And if I'm not feeding them hay, they're not going to live. Okay? I know that. Okay? That I don't have to go through studies to show. If I have to go through a long explanation as to why something is, that doesn't mean it's necessarily false. That also doesn't make it true, because I can pontificate upon something that might seem obscure. That doesn't mean I'm smart. That just means I'm a pontificator, right? That just means I might be making stuff up as I go. So just because someone says, oh, this is evidence-based. Well, what evidence, sir or ma'am? That should be your first question. What evidence? Okay? And so when these ladies, my goats I'm referring to, have babies, I know what those babies are when they come in. Okay? I know what those babies are when they're inside of them, just by observation. And so I can tell you that if I don't interfere with them, and health does not interfere with them, there will be a baby goat that comes out of it. So if there's a baby goat that comes out of them without my interference, me interfering, to me, means that I killed that baby goat, or the medical condition did. Okay? If I would have interfered with that baby, and it would have not came out, and it would have been dead, I killed it. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, folks. And I'm not trying to argue for or against one or another thing in regards to anything, but what I'm trying to tell you is you need to observe with your eyes and your ears. You need to take common sense. You need to apply that to whatever you're doing. If you build a house and it falls in, you've done something wrong. Okay? You have done something wrong. If you wanted that house to stay, that is. If you, let's just put it this way. It's good to go through college and learn how to think on that level, because then you can discuss things with others. And you can discuss ideas in a depth that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And you can rebuke ideas, which is even more important, than you otherwise would not be able to. But what I will tell you is this: once you get through the other side of that and you're truly enlightened and you truly see that everyone's really just winging it in this world until they've had a lot of experience doing one or two particular things. What you find out is it makes you pretty jaded. It can anyway. And it shows you that PhD after your name really doesn't mean that much, especially if you've never actually done anything. Same thing with, you know, just because you have a certification that tells you you can build a house and you're a certified framer, doesn't necessarily mean you know anything really about framing until you've built several houses. You don't know a whole lot about it. You could say you do, you know the book work, but how does that apply? And how that applies is something different. So I'm taking welding. How I apply my welding, they can show you in a book, they can tell you how to do it, but you just have to get a feel for what it feels like to lay that bead down. Now when you get a feel for that, you then know how to make a proper weld. But I could tell you until I'm blue in the face how to do it. But until you actually get there, do it, make that bead, I cannot possibly anticipate all the ways you could misconstrue that information. Anyway, keep your eyes and ears open. It's been great talking to y'all. I want you to understand that, in my opinion, the world's going sideways because we've lost true knowledge. In a lot of ways, we believe these statisticians who make things up based on an ounce of truth. They come up with a pound of lies. We need to get back to a point of understanding that we truly don't understand nearly as much as we think we do. And some things are truly just miracles. How is it that X, Y, or Z happens? And we cannot, as a human species, answer possibly all those questions. Now we can try, and we should try, to understand how everything works. But we should not use our own political agendas or our own biases to tell us which way our research should go and which way we should publish it, just so that we can be quote unquote right. And that's called vanity, and we should avoid that. But anyway, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.